An array is a group of similar items. It may be primitive data types like integers or strings or floats. Well, strings are primitive or characters. But it may also be an object. So when we have our box, our ball, or other custom classes that we make, we can have an array of those elements as well. But arrays are just simply a way to store a reference to a whole group or collection of items of the same type. So the syntax for creating an array and utilizing it in processing can be a little bit awkward or redundant, but I'll first start out. I'm going to make an array of integers. I'll just call it ints. So to create the variable, if I was making an array that was a single integer, I just would have said int and then whatever name I wanted. In this case, I used the square brackets. In most programming languages, square brackets are used as a way to designate that something will be an array. Arrays carry across most languages because they're a way for us to group together like elements so that we can work with them in our programs. So once I have created that variable, now I am going to populate it. So the first thing I have to do is tell processing how many items will be in this array. And this is where our syntax gets really kind of ugly to look at. So ints is my array name, and then I say it's equal to a new, and then I redundantly, in my opinion, specify what kind of objects are going in this array, because we've already established what kind of objects will be in the array when we created the variable in the first place. But we have to repeat that. Inside of the square brackets, we now list how many objects are in the array. So we'll just add a little comment here. And I will commonly interchange the word the items in the array or objects. That's probably bad because objects are referring to something different within programming, because that's an item created by a class. So it's a class object versus just a primitive data type. So items would be a more generic term, but I will sometimes interchange that, because when we think of items in our brains, we will sometimes just think of it as an object. A number is an object when it not really in the context of programming, but concretely we think of it that way. So now that I have established that my array called ints has 3 items in it, I'm going to assign those items to my array. So I'll populate my array. Just going to put a note here that's important, that each object or each item in my array has index position associated with it. So if we think about it, my int is really equal to, if I were to set it, I could say 28, 104, 52. So these are all integers, and now I've set the value for each of those items in my array. So when we look at this, now processing doesn't really like us to set our array this way, but that's what I'm going to be creating. It's a sequence of items that will be inside this array. I have 3 items. The item here has an index position of 0, because computers like to start counting from 0, not from 1. It's just one of those quirky things that computers do. They start counting from 0 as their first place. So they don't start out count to 10. They'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 10 items, but we start with 0. So to find or to set this particular item, we're really setting the item from or the item at position 0 or index 0 in my array. So this is the array that I will be creating. And we can do it by saying ints, and the item at position 0 is going to be equal to, and now I will just put 28, if I can figure out how to type. And then ints 1 is equal to 104. Ints 2 is equal to 52. So this now has created that array of integers, 3 of them, because I told processing save enough memory for this array to have 3 integers in it. And each of those integers then are at index position 0, 1, and 2. So we can use that index position to assign the value to that place in my array. And we can also use that same index position to access or to ask the program, it's like, hey, tell me about that item in my array. So if I were to just simply say print ints 2, that is now going to print out a number. Now, if I want to change the value, so if I want to change the value of an item in my array, I can do it the same way that I set it in the beginning. So I could say ints2 is equal to 36. So now if I print that out, that is going to print out 36. If I run it, we will see that it happened. Now, you'll also notice in the console it's coming out, it says 5236 all on the same line. When I use the print statement inside of processing, it prints out that content, but it doesn't actually put it onto a new line. So if I want to print and have it go on to the next line, we modify our print statement to print ln. Now, using print statements, it's a really convenient way when you're starting to work with values and you aren't sure if your program is finding or creating or using the right value. Is you print out your value so you can go, all right, that's what is being assigned to this item at this point in time. So we use it as a troubleshooting or a debugging technique to figure out what is really going on. So I changed my print to print line. Now when I run it, we'll see how the numbers are on 2 separate lines. So if you've been trying to use print statements and they're now all grouping together, you will realize using print line or print ln, it works a little bit better. So now, this time I'm going to create an array of strings. Strings are just simply more than one character of text. So I specify what kind of thing it is, strings, square brackets, and but the kind of thing is a string, not strings. And my name for my string array is going to be strings. Do notice that the word string has a capital S, and that's because a string is not a primitive data type, but it is a class that is composed of multiple characters grouped together. So because it's a class, by convention, classes always begin with a capital letter. That's why int as a primitive data type starts with an I, while string starts with a capital S, not a lowercase s. So that's just a little point of importance, but something to keep in mind. So I'll set strings equal to new, and then reiterate, yes, I am indeed putting a string character into it. And this time I'll just use 5. We could do more We could make it 50, doesn't really matter, but 5 should be enough to get the point across. This time we will be using a loop to populate it. I'm just going to add some extra spaces down at the bottom so I can scoot that up on screen. So if I want to use a loop to populate it, we know how many objects are in this. And if we know the number of objects that we have when we are trying to do a loop, a for loop is often going to be our better choice. A while loop is useful when we don't know how many times we need to go through it. A for loop is useful when we know exactly how many times we want to go through it. And in this case, because we know there are 5 elements in the array, we want to go through the loop 5 times. So I will establish my loop with for int I is equal to 0. I is less than 5. I plus plus. I return twice, close out my curly brace. It's really a useful technique. Anytime you do an open curly brace, hit return twice, put in your closing curly brace, hit the up arrow once, and that guarantees you will have matched curly braces while you are working. That's going to save you countless hours of debugging grief when you can't figure out why your code is broken, and it's simply because you forgot that trailing or closing curly brace. So if I run this loop here, it should now, after seeing the 52 and 36 that we got printed out before, it's now going to print out 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 because each time the loop went through, it printed out the letter I, or the integer I. So we get the 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But that's not really what I want. What I want to do is use this loop to populate that string. So I'll just say strings I. So the string's at position I. We'll set it equal to, in this case, we'll just set it equal to string. And now a fun thing that we can do is I can now add this integer to my grouping of letters. So I can say string is, I can add on I to it. So we're not technically adding a number to letters in terms of trying to do math. We're appending, we're adding on to the end of this group of letters this number. And it can be even more than a single word. Now if we print that out, and we don't need to print that one out anymore. So if we print out each item as it gets added to the array, so we can go through it and see what happens. We can see that it prints out string item is 0, string item is 1. So each item in our array is now a string that has this number in it, making each one different and unique from its fellow string. So when we're populating, we can sometimes use this I, but what we will see shortly is when we start trying to work with it and use objects with this and start populating in objects into our arrays, then we will be using something along the line. So if I had my objects array and I just go I is equal to new object, something like this. So we're putting that new object in our array at that position. So there we're just using I to correspond to the position in the array. We're not using it as part of a way of creating a unique set of things. But of course this is failing because I don't have an objects array. I don't have a class called object, so that's all just bad. So we'll look at that in a little bit. So I'm getting rid of my previous print statements here. I don't care about those inside my for loop where I set the values of all of my items. Now I have the copy pasted and got rid of everything else. I'm going to do a loop again. And this loop is just going to check out the contents of my strings array. Actually, checkout wouldn't be. Print would be a better option. Print out the contents of my strings array. So if I want to change just that third item, I just do it by saying strings 2. Remember, we count from 2. And I set it equal to the third. It is now different. And now if I print out that array, so I run this, we'll see as it prints out those statements, string item 0, 1, the third is now different. String item is 3, string item is 4. So we access items in our array by using the array name, square brackets, and the index position of the item we are trying to access. If we want to set its value, we set its value equal to something. So when we start putting objects in our array, then we're going to be able to do a whole lot more stuff with this as we move forward.